Here we go. Today is Monday, August 28th, 2017, and this is episode 200 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bow, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hello, Jerry. And as our regular listeners, all three of them should know, 200 is not that substantial of a number for us. 256, now that's
the big number. That's right.
That is the big number. But hello, how are you? How's things?
It's been busy. How about you?
Ditto. We missed last week because I was running around Orlando over the weekend and then flying for the eclipse, which was amazing. And little plug for myself. If you're curious, I did go flying for the eclipse totality and took a video of what it looked like to fly through totality. I've got it up on my YouTube page. Maybe Jerry will put it on the show notes. I don't know. I could ask him.
It'll cost you.
Take it out of my salary.
All right. Good deal.
And then this weekend, now we're recording Monday because I was at a shooting class all weekend, and now I'm tired and sore and beat up and bruised. But hey, we're here, and it's Monday, and we're back.
And that's all that counts.
Right.
Yeah. So, just before we get into it, a reminder that the thoughts and opinions we express on the show are ours and do not represent those of our employers. Coming up, reminder, DerbyCon. Coming up, I guess it's like 3 weeks.
It is
rapidly approaching.
We'll be there. I know, it's crazy. And I'll be at DragonCon this coming weekend. Not presenting or on a panel or anything, but if anybody's around, hit me up on the Twitters.
Absolutely. And then in end of October, we will be at the O'Reilly conference in New York. And we have a very handy discount code if you're interested. It's security20. So if you go to, I believe it's conferences.o'reilly.com, look for the security conference in New York, and you can use the discount code security20, and you'll save. I don't know. Was it 30% for security20? Is that right?
I believe it's 20%.
I know. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
And then
you're not so good at the marketing. You should say, "Oh, it's 10%." No, this week only, it's 20%.
That's why I'm in IT, because I suck at selling.
And one other quick thing about the O'Reilly conference is you and I are hosting the Ignite track Monday night, which is good time. So look it up. We're not trying to pimp our own gig here, but if you want to check it out, it's fun times if you're going to be there.
Absolutely.
There's call for papers open for it. We'll be looking at everybody's submissions, so
absolutely
include whiskey
and donuts. And then in March of next year, we will be in Bogota, Colombia.
That's the rumor.
At the Tactical Edge conference. So that should be a good time too.
It's like we have like a schedule and we're busy and stuff.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
So then next thing is shout out to our Patreon donors. Thank you very, very much.
Absolutely. You guys are not only helping to pay for the show, but also contributing at least a little bit, some, depending on the cost, to helping us get out to see people and talk to people. So you guys are awesome.
That's right. And then with that, we will get into some stories. So first up for this week, we have a story from SecurityWeek.com, and the title is 3 Questions Every CISO Should Be Able to Answer. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this one a little bit is because it seemed... I've been having some trouble. Maybe it's the pain medication I've been on lately, but when I read these stories, my blood pressure just starts to raise. And it seems like
I don't know, Jerry. It seems pretty straightforward. Look, every one of these can be solved by a Blinky box. So just go buy the Blinky boxes.
That's true. So the first thing every CISO should be able to answer is, can you account for every device on your network?
Okay, let me ask you a question. Am I a CISO of like a 30-person accounting company, Or am I
Yes,
CISO of a 250,000 person multinational?
correct. See, that's the problem with these is, and then also I would say how many CISOs would answer in the negative? I mean, regardless of whether they actually know.
So there's a little bit of a I'm not sure what the psychological crutch there or bias involved with that, but yeah, who would admit that they wouldn't, right?
Right. And by the way, they may honestly think they do, and that's a big problem. So, I think intuitively these things make sense, but my issue is, they're not done because they're really difficult to do, and kind of offering these things as high level fluffy guidance without, well, and here's here's the way to do it is. It's just problematic to me.
Well, okay, so let's talk about the first one. The concept is, do you know everything on your environment? Which makes sense from a concept of you have to know what you have out there to be able to defend it, and you should have good accounting and asset management of what's in your environment. Sure, I get that. So then you know if something shouldn't be there, you know if a rogue device showed up, but that is a pretty difficult problem to solve. And is it the first problem I'm going to solve?
Correct.
I don't know.
That's I think that's one of the fundamental issues is, this kind of goes back to the whole, castle walls and moats type thing, which everybody says is dead and outmoded, right? So at the same time,
wait, was that outmoded or outmoded?
Oh, good one. Anyway,
so I like the concept. You should strive for it. I want to be scanning everything in my environment. Ideally, I've got really good network access control. But all those things imply certain cultural situations, budgetary situations, and policy situations that aren't in place in every organization.
Correct.
Yep. So,
but at the same time, I think there's a lot of opportunities using commonly implemented security controls, to enable this, like inventory scans that you use to reconcile against your asset database. And I even like the idea of, and I've done this a couple of times, using firewall rules, or I should say firewall logs, to identify systems that are talking on your network. Again, reconciling that against your asset database.
Sure.
And then when you find something that shouldn't be there, well, that's that's something that needs to be investigated. But the point is, I'm not sure that's the top issue most organizations have to deal with. And then
it could be foundational to other issues, like making sure everything's patched. Well, making sure everything's patched means making sure I know everything's out there. I can see that.
Yeah. So this is a philosophical issue I've seen with a lot of organizations and a lot of bigger companies in particular, where a lot of the security processes are kind of tied to knowledge that an asset exists. And if you're I guess so. If your organization is like that, then not knowing what's on your network means that everything else falls apart.
Right? So what you're saying is that you should have controls that protect you regardless of your knowledge of everything that's out there.
Correct.
Yes. But okay, let's bring that back to patching. How do I patch something that I don't know is out there?
Well, so I guess I would turn it around and say, how does it come to be that you have systems able to connect to your network, which you don't know about? I mean, we have pretty well worn methods of controlling this. I mean, so I I'm not sure this is the right way to necessarily solve the problem versus something like network access control and those sorts of things.
So you're more saying prescriptively control what attaches to the environment.
Yeah.
I guess it depends, right? I mean, and I know we got a lot of stories to cover, but it depends if you're walking into an environment and you're trying to mature the environment. If it depends on how big the environment is, it depends on how spread out it is. It depends on, some environments have let's say you're in a university which can't control what connects and doesn't connect. Or you're in a corporation that has a very freewheeling policy with perhaps they've got a bunch of R&D guys or developers or whatnot that are just allowed to plug in anything they want anytime they want. I don't know. It's a really complex problem, I think, depending on the individual corporation or environment and their particular policies and standards and culture.
Yeah, I guess it comes down to. It comes down to thinking it through, right? Depending on how your organization is structured, at the end of the day, you need to make sure everything is, the requisite controls are being applied to all the systems on the network. And so if you're going to solve that through, kind of the network access control, where you're not going to allow things that aren't, authorized and i.e. known about, or if that's not how you operate, well, then you need to have some other control that's, continuously scanning for, for new things popping on the internet or on the network, and then making sure you figure out how to apply the controls to those. So, yeah,
it's a complex problem.
Yeah,
but it's boiled down into 4 paragraphs here. I don't see the problem.
That's true. The next item is to know where your data is traveling, and both internally and externally. And they point out that in the DNC hack, there were 80 gigabytes of data taken out of the network, which equated to about 500 megabytes per day. Which, by the way, in an organization of any size, you're going to have a hell of a time, detecting 500 megs a day. That's a small needle in a haystack.
Yeah, that feels like a lot of, Monday morning quarterbacking for folks who've never worked in a really large organization.
Yeah, or even a smaller one. I mean, if you, that's just not that much data. Especially if the data is not emanating from a place that doesn't appear suspicious. For instance, a lot of these more complex attacks are staging the files to be exfiltrated on systems that are normally accessible from the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if somebody, if an attacker copies files to your external web server from your internal network or some internal type system, are you really going to notice an extra 500 megs of traffic leaving your web server?
Yeah, and at what period of time as well?
Yeah. Yep. So I think that the concept is sound, that you really ought to have some way to look for anomalies. I think, to be candid, having been in this industry for a long time, this is a really, really hard problem to solve.
Well, I'm sure there's a blinky box out there you could buy.
I can imagine. I can just imagine tomorrow morning I am going to have 10 LinkedIn messages from people with a solution to this problem. So bring it on.
This really comes down to intimately knowing your environment and being able to monitor that environment and also be able to stay up to all the changes in your environment as business is changing and growing and adapting. That takes a tremendous amount of slack in your security team, great integration with your business, and tremendously good communication. Those are tough problems to solve in most companies.
Exactly. So I guess point is, I think it's unreasonable to ask a CISO of a random company Do you know where your data is traveling internally and externally? Because I would argue if they say yes, either they're lying or they don't know,
or they're naive.
That's what I mean. They're naive.
And probably in my career, my instinct would have been, we'll just lock everything down with firewalls so they can't do anything I don't know about. Well, that just leads to shadow IT as they go out to the cloud to get done what they want to get done and go around your onerous rules.
Exactly. And that's, by the way, it's becoming increasingly convenient and easy to do.
Yep.
And then finally, their third question for CISOs is, do you have meaningful oversight of how your users behave? And certainly that's, I think, a reasonable question. But again, I think this is one of those top of the pyramid type of security controls, right?
You've already got all the basic stuff solved?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. When you get to the point where you're talking about, behavioral analytics of your employees, like in my view at least, that presumes you've solved all the other stuff.
Well, again, everything is a trade-off. So where are you spending your resources, whether it's money or people or time? What's your big bang for your buck? And
exactly right.
I mean, you could go buy a good user behavior analysis tool and implement it and probably find things and go, look how successful this was. But you could also take that same money, time, and resources and maybe better automate your patch management program, and maybe that'll solve more problems for you. I don't know. It depends on your environment. Right. Or buy a better anti-phishing technology for the edge, since a ton of problems start with phishing right now. I don't know.
Yep.
By the way, I'm not dogging user behavior analysis. I think it's actually an interesting concept. And if my CISO never logs in except from Atlanta between 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. and suddenly he's logging in from Kuala Lumpur at 3 a.m, yeah, that's probably something to look at.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that.
But you're right. Is that your top priority? If you've got other lower level, less sexy, basic cyber hygiene stuff to work out?
Yep. So moving on to our next story, which comes from Ars Technica. The title here is "Powerful Backdoor Found in Software Used by Over 100 Banks and Energy Companies." So a company called NetSerang was apparently pretty badly compromised, and this company offers a number of different IT management applications, which I, as far as I can tell, are largely used in Asian countries. I hadn't ever heard of them, but apparently they're relatively common. So anyway, this company was compromised, and their code base was manipulated, and a malicious update, which kind of sounds like NotPetya, was pushed out to customers between July 17th and August 4th. And that, as the title may lead you to believe, that update actually had a backdoor, which apparently was used to, or may have been used to steal data from victims. And Kaspersky apparently found this by investigating a customer report of a suspicious DNS activity. By the way, I thought the mechanics of this particular piece of malware were pretty cool. So it was encrypted, and the decryption keys were passed in DNS text records.
Yeah, it's something that has been talked about often, using DNS as command and control, because DNS is so often open and very rarely looked at as anything other than innocuous.
Right.
And kudos for the customer going, wow, this is a weird DNS lookup. That's kind of, in my mind, exactly how you're going to find these kinds of problems, because this is a tough problem to solve any other way. You've got to trust somebody. Unless you're willing to hand roll all of your own code all the time, you've got to trust somebody, right? You got to trust your software vendors at some point. And shame on the software vendor for not picking this up, but it happens. So then the victims caught the behavior of the malicious code, which I think makes a lot of sense. And how we need to go is continue to look for weird stuff to find malware, because we know there's no other silver bullet out there.
Yeah, the one thing that I was thinking, and I agree with you. I think the big challenge, we've talked about this in past episodes, that I think we're seeing something of a trend line here, and I don't know if this is going to turn into the shark thing, or the shark attack syndrome, or
right. Maybe this has happened a bunch, but now it's getting reported more, so it looks like
it's right. But maybe there is that this is the start of a tidal wave of new attack types. But I got to thinking, I was browsing Twitter, and I just love that Twitter account Bad Things Daily, which tweets out the desktop or the tabletop exercise scenarios. And
yes.
And so this one kind of made me think about a tabletop scenario, like your IT management software was just discovered to have been delivering a backdoor Trojan. Happy Friday. and what is your response to that?
It depends. What sort of alcohol do I have in the house?
But it's
how up to date is my resume?
It's an interesting question. Like, how do you even approach that? And obviously, a big part of that answer is in what kind of instrumentation you have available in logging and whatnot to be able to go back and do some kind of retrospective analysis. But goodness, that's so. One of the comments from Kaspersky and from NetSerang was, you ought to go and inspect the systems in your environment. If you applied the patches in that time window, you need to go and see what was going on.
Clearly we should never patch.
Well, and that's the whole, one of the big issues here is this attack style is kind of leveraging the thing that we've been beating into companies for a long time. Like, patching is super important.
Yep. Well, the bad guys love to exploit our weaknesses.
Right.
And they turn our best practices against us by doing stuff like this. It's a psychological war.
Yeah.
And I don't have a good solve on this one.
No,
Sucks.
but I think it's just it's that.
But is it a pocket case? Is it a 1 percentile problem?
Probably so.
Probably
so. But we've seen it now a couple of times, and again, don't know if this is the beginning of a big trend or if it's just going to be background radiation that gets reported.
But here's the interesting part, and this is the key thing that I worry about is, CISO or CTO or whomever sees these sorts of reports and goes, we need to fix this. Pull these 3 people off of this really boring but important project and put them on that for something that is a rare issue, as opposed to, why don't we spend more time on phishing?
No, that's a good point. I mean, I think we have to keep things in context, right? It's rather like, focusing on the terrorism problem. Meanwhile, 500,000 people die of heart disease, and so we got to prioritize, right?
That's why we got to fight the cholesterol over there before we fight it over here.
That's right.
Wait, no,
something like that. Something like that. Anyway, so moving on to the next story, which comes from Brian Krebs, and the title here is "Blowing the Whistle on Bad Attribution."
Boy.
Yeah, so I don't want to dwell on this one too long, but I thought it was a really good, kind of a really good summary of some of the issues with attribution that we've talked about in the past.
Yeah. It's a very well written article.
There was one great point, and I'm trying to find it in here. It was a great quote, and of course, I've lost it. But basically, the gist of the quote I was trying to find is, the indicators of compromise are good to help you understand if you've been compromised, not necessarily who compromised you.
Yeah, it's right here. So this is from Matt Tate, who is a senior fellow at the Robert Strauss Center for International Security and Law at UT Austin. Quote, "It's a classic problem of these IOCs, indicators of compromise, indicate you may be compromised, but they're not very good for attribution.
There you go.
The Grizzly Step report is a massive file of signature, and loads of people have run those, found various things on their network, and then assumed it's all related to the DNC hack. But there's absolutely no tie between the DNC hack that in any way involves this particular web shell. That's the point of this particular story." So, yes, this really does a great job of something that I've harped on over and over and over and over again, which is attribution is A, incredibly difficult, and B, probably not incredibly relevant in your environment.
Yeah, and I would also say that in the context, in certain contexts, and this is a subtext, I think, in this particular article to say, especially in matters where governments are involved, there may be political aspects to certain attribution, certain works of attribution.
That's a good point. That they may have other agendas behind blaming Liechtenstein for attacking
right.
Bob's Budget Bait and Dial-In Shop.
Right. Well, they point out that, I think at the time we may have talked about this. There was a Vermont utility company who was, an anonymous government source was quoted in a Washington Post article, about how this, after the Grizzly Steppe indicators were released, this Vermont, utility company in Vermont found, that they were hacked. The power grid was hacked, and the utility came back and said, well, not really. We looked for IOCs, but we found it on one of our laptops that really it wasn't connected to the grid. And so that kind of tells me.
Well, that just means that they've now developed air gap bridging technology.
Obviously.
Maybe ultrasonic sound.
Yes.
Via the BIOS.
Where have we heard this before? Yes.
So, I mean, one thing I'll say on this, I think we have this weird feedback loop going on where executives, leaders, policymakers in government, those in power who aren't necessarily highly technical, keep screaming, "Who did this? We need to know who did this."
Mm-hmm.
And the technical folks try to answer as best they can, but the nuance and the uncertainty of those answers is lost in translation. Then the media gets a hold of it or it gets published in reports. And I don't know that the folks who are making these decisions about labeling so-and-so as responsible for this and that truly understand all of the nuance involved in trying to tie a piece of digital data or digital footprint to an individual or a group, and how difficult that is. And I will keep screaming till the end of my days, if I'm in a corporation, why do I care? It doesn't change my world. If it was North Korea, if it was the Russians, if it was Billy down the street in his mom's basement, I've still got to find it. I've still got to stop it. And I've still got to adapt to the same threat list that I've got today, no matter who the person committing the action is.
Yeah. So I will say, kind of post NotPetya, I in general, I agree with that as a blue team type person, but I think my observation is that a lot of business executives want to understand to some degree who is the actor behind it, because I think there are possibly different messaging that you might use when you go public. If you've been breached in it by that, and also, what your potentially what your liability is likely to be in court. I.e., if this was an act of war in scare quotes, right, or something like that, that there may be that may be useful as a defense if your user base decides to sue you or what have you.
Yeah, I get what you're saying from a high level leadership level. I don't know. Yeah. I just think we get very distracted with this topic.
I completely agree. We get very wrapped around the axle about it, and and they I love how Brian Krebs kind of sows some seeds of doubt when he talks about how the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency tweeted out something about an attack underway, and they showed a video of the Norse Pew Pew map.
Oh man! Oh, going back to our earlier point, though, you never know what other politics or agendas going on with stuff coming out of the government too.
Yeah. I think that's the issue, and a lot of the stuff is held that is classified, and so you don't really know, is the classified stuff different than what makes it out into the public domain, and and if so, why? But it's pretty clear that Brian kind of paints a pretty troubling picture around the Grizzly Steppe set of indicators, because at the time it was pretty well equated with being tied to the DNC attack. But he goes on to point out that there's really there's not only is it unlikely, it's pretty darn right definitive that the two weren't really linked, despite news reports to the contrary.
Right, which goes to the current allegations and indictment of a malware tech guy who's currently stuck in the U.S. under awaiting trial on having contributed to malware.
Yep.
Who knows?
Yeah. Anyway, so moving on to the next story. This one comes from CSO Online, and the title is, "When it comes to the cloud, do CISOs have their heads in the sand?" I guess the answer is obviously yes. This is I would say this is an article that kind of leads up. The end analysis is, you need a cloud access security broker. Next story. But the point is, as we talked about earlier, it's becoming increasingly easy and likely that different business constituents can go and set up their own shadow IT using cloud type services. But one of the concerns I have about this is, they seem to be stretching the boundaries of what you call cloud. They're trying to paint the picture of how dangerous cloud is, and they're pointing to the breach of Ashley Madison and Yahoo, and that's a fundamentally different thing than people setting up shadow IT. I think it would have been a much more reasonable.
They started to merge concentrated risk with the concept of managing your cloud securely.
Yes.
Yeah, it got weird there.
It did get weird. The big problem that seems to be, which we talk about a lot, it's the Chris Vickery problem, where people are just uploading crap into S3 buckets that are globally accessible to the world.
Indeed.
And then get downloaded. But I think there certainly is a big risk if it's not managed well. If it is managed well, I think on par or on average, you're gonna be ahead of the game, because quite often, from an infrastructure resiliency standpoint, you're not going to be able to afford that, or most companies wouldn't be able to afford that kind of.
Well, this goes back to the old thing: is what is your core competency as a company?
Right.
And how do you focus on your core competency, the areas you excel at, and outsource everything else?
Right.
And I could argue Google's email team probably is better than anybody else at defending Google's email.
Right.
Or email in general, right? Or detecting phishing attacks. And yes, you have a concentrated risk, but you also have a concentrated, what's the opposite? Knowledge base and concentrated effectiveness of controls, perhaps, in general. To me, what I take away from this article is more a reminder of, if you don't know about the cloud projects going on in your organization as a security team, that doesn't mean they're not happening. That means that you don't know about them.
Yeah, exactly. They're working around you.
And every organization I've dealt with that has any level of InfoSec, that's what's going on right now, is those business units are out there and just launching things in the cloud as I don't know, let's just play with this and see what it looks like. And if it becomes real, we'll take it to IT. And then before you know it, it is real. And it didn't launch. It escaped. And IT never knew about it until maybe much later. And now the executives are dependent upon it. And you're not going to put that genie back in the bottle.
Right. Right. Yeah, the world has changed, and we need to change with it.
And the other thing that I take away whenever I start reading about cloud is, I don't think 90% of our current InfoSec workforce understands how to secure cloud right now.
I think that's very true, yes.
It's a very different model. And I think we've got to start working on training up our workforces to shift from the 30-year legacy of defending a perimeter to now I've got to deal with my data being accessible from anybody, anywhere, all the time on a box I don't own. How do I deal with that?
Yeah, and so I mean, to carry on to that thought, I think that one of the issues is we are trying to apply that kind of outmoded, there we go again, castle walls and moats philosophy to the cloud environment, and it's just not, they're not compatible. No,
it's true. Speaking of moats, would your moat have llamas or alligators, do you think?
Ooh. Well, it's got to be alligator. No, it's got to be llamas. Yeah.
What about a llama gator?
Llama gator. A llama dial.
Oh,
I like it.
Oh. Well, I'll get the guys in R&D working on that.
All right.
So this is something that I keep thinking about, is I see this over and over again where various departments are out launching things. And even if they came to most IT groups and said, all right, we're going to do this, secure it, the IT group's going to go,
no.
Right. Even if they don't say no, right? Let's say, yeah, of course they're going to say no. But let's say they don't say no, and then they go to actually do it. They're like, somebody Google how to secure this thing? And it's not for lack of I'm not ripping on folks. I'm just saying the world has changed, and we're not changing with it, in part because we're so busy doing the old way.
Yeah,
especially for a large company.
That's a good point. And I think the whole cloud philosophy is around increasing velocity, so that you're moving fast and nimbly. And that is often at odds with the whole, the philosophy of most security organizations and security people. Like, you need to be thoughtful and deliberate and diligent and be, thinking about what are the different risks. And in the meantime, the cloud teams, they'll have had, 7 iterations by the time you're still putting your shoes on. So
I think we can adapt. I don't think we're doing it well right now.
No, but we'll get there.
As an industry.
Yeah, from a personal development standpoint, this kind of is and we've talked about this in the past, automation and cloud and whatnot. These are the key horizons that people from a personal level should be investing in bettering themselves on, because this is, maybe I think there are probably already organizations that value this, but this is where it's going.
Jesus Christ on a stick with raspberry sauce. You are an executive.
Shush.
Wow.
So moving on to the next story.
That was the most buzzworthy
Woo.
executive trite I've heard in at least 5 minutes.
I don't know where that came from.
No, but I don't disagree. And I guess where I'm going with this is, we need to start learning this stuff. And one thing they do talk about in here is cloud access security brokers, which is a new class of technology to help control this, which I think is cool stuff. It's fairly young, it's fairly immature, but probably I'd recommend people start reading about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even that is a troublesome thing, but it does help you apply some level of sanity around the proliferation of IT. And by the way, this kind of reminds me of, I really want the old EDS cat herding commercial back, because this is the cat herding problem. So anyway, moving on to the next story, which comes from ZDNet. Quick update to the NotPetya thing. Title is Petya ransomware cyber attack costs could hit $300 million for shipping giant Maersk.
Ow.
Yeah. So this is that's a big number, right? We're talking about almost real money here that is at stake, and they point out in the article.
Almost real.
Almost real, yeah. I mean, it's getting there.
Yeah,
it's getting there. It's like a year's salary or so. That's a lot of money. Anyway,
before taxes.
Before taxes, that's right. That's right. They point out that there are a number of organizations that are still dealing with the effects of this. They point out that FedEx subsidiary TNT is still not fully recovered, and it, from what I understand from reading some other articles, it sounds like some of their data is just gone. Like it's never coming back. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty problematic. They talk about this company called Reckitt Bank. No, man, I'm not even gonna try it right now. It's the people that make Durex condoms. How about that?
Oh,
they are predicted to have lost 100 million pounds. I mean, this is a lot of. I mean, that was a big diet. I wanted to say that, but
I can't even tell you all the jokes that are running through my head that I'm censoring myself on right now.
Anyway,
I mean,
there's this stuff has very material consequences to businesses. But that, I guess the one of the fundamental questions we have to wrestle with, I think, is, was NotPetya and WannaCry an aberration? That's going to be so rare. Did we have the 100-year flood twice in a year, and then we're never going to see this again? Or is this is this going to become much more normal? And does that mean that we've got to react accordingly and kind of combine our disaster recovery capabilities with the concept of it's not just volcanoes and earthquakes and tornadoes, but it's also major cyber attacks that we have to
spoiler alert, the latter.
Yeah. So anyway, WannaCry bad. NotPetya worse.
Yeah, well, your face makes me want to cry.
You're so funny. Funny.
Well, funny looking.
My mom said I'm very handsome. I don't know what you're talking about.
That's not what she told me. Anyway, go on. It's late. We're tired.
Yep. Next story comes from helpnetsecurity.com. Title is Another Ukrainian Software Maker's Site Compromised to Spread Malware.
It's almost like the Ukrainians are under attack or something.
I think so. So
I've had a bad run of it lately.
Another Ukrainian financial software maker was compromised. This time it was a little different. It wasn't used to spread up malicious updates. It was only used to spread exploit kits to visitors to their website, which is far less bad, I suppose.
So classic watering hole type attack.
Definitely classic watering hole, which, hey, it's not as, it's certainly not as virulent as a network worm, right? But if you're going to target if you're going to target a particular class of company, based on geography or whatever, it's a pretty effective way to do that.
It's true. I blame Liechtenstein personally.
Well, they are kind of sketchy. And then finally, we have a story from I guess it's the city of Los Angeles's blog. They are I got to take a step back for a second. One of our listeners pointed this out to us. The city of Los Angeles has started what they're calling the Los Angeles Cyber Lab, which is a public-private partnership to establish I guess what I would characterize as like an ISAC type construct, but at a more of a geographically concentrated perspective, run by a city versus some broad federal government consortium. I think this is a great idea. I don't know how well it'll work in practice, right? Because in general, one of the major issues we have with the ISACs and some of the other government-led information sharing programs is like no one wants to share.
Right. Yeah. It'll be interesting to watch. I wish them luck. Maybe they'll finally hit on the right combination of incentives and people and participants to get it right.
Yeah, and that's my hope, and I wanted to mention it here in case any of our listeners are in that area and want to go get linked up to it. It's innovations like this, which I think are where some of the next legs up are going to come from. But again, don't know if it's going to work out. But doing the same thing and expecting different results is also not fruitful either. So give it a look.
It'll be interesting. Yeah, it'll be interesting to watch.
By the way, they have this kind of 3-phased approach. The first phase was kind of a push of threat information out from the city based on findings from their SOC. They have phase 2 is establishing kind of a threat information sharing platform where organizations can kind of dump information out, and then it gets disseminated to the members after it's been anonymized or what have you. And then they have the thing I thought was most interesting was setting up a honeypot, and they're offering vendors to come in and and try their products out in a honeypot, which it's not really clear exactly the how extensive and whatnot the honeypot is, but a pretty cool idea.
Rule 1 of Honeypot Club: you don't talk about the honeypot.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So anyway, links in the show notes. If you're in the area, give it a look. If you're in a different location or whatnot, I would take a look at. Keep an eye on this to see if it's something that may be a good model to use in other locations. I will say one of the concerns I have is this is a city government, and so the types of attacks seen on it may not necessarily translate very beneficially to private enterprises. So. But again,
fair enough.
Don't know,
yeah.
Right? It's
see what happens.
Yeah, keep an eye on it. So that's the show. That's episode 200. Now only 56 more to go, and we will have the big party.
So one quick thoughts go out to everybody being impacted by the flooding down South Texas and now heading into states eastward. Crazy stuff going on down there. And, looking at that huge widespread flooding and rain issues makes me think, yeah, maybe I should separate my data centers by more than 2 miles.
Yes, indeed. And super, I mean, I am glad you said that. Some of our listeners, I've seen pictures. People have, I asked people to donate some money, and I actually got some of our listeners posting pictures.
Jerry,
yes,
Jerry, just a little tip: when you ask people to donate money, it's not for you, buddy.
Darn it, that was where I went wrong.
I mean, it was a good thought. It just
that's where I went wrong. Huh. Anyway, yeah. So I got some pictures back of people's houses being flooded out, and it is. I mean, everything I'm seeing is it is just horrible, and my thoughts and well wishes go out to everybody that's been impacted. So, anyhow,
ditto.
I appreciate everyone listening, and hopefully we will, be back on a weekly schedule. And with that, we will talk again next week. You can find the show notes for today's show on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow Mr. Khaled on Twitter @Lurg. You can follow me on Twitter @MaliciousLincoln. With that, we will talk again next time.
Have a great week, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.